there. You too. Beth AM. It's your girl Mira. And I'm super excited to be back with another episode of our podcast. Brought to you by the amazing folks at Judge Off. Hey.
Hey. What's up? Everyone, I'm Leo. And I'm thrilled to be here with Mira, discussing the most fascinating topics and making you all laugh along the way.
Between our last podcast and this one, I had a pretty interesting experience. I was trying to make a traditional Moldovan dish, but let's just say it didn't quite turn out as expected. I ended up with a pot of what looked like a cross between a failed science experiment and the aliens' breakfast.
Nice one. Mira, I'm sure it was. Interesting. I, on the other hand, had a rather unusual encounter with a Papua New Guinean friend who tried to teach me how to play the kandudra. Let's just say my rhythmic skills are still a work in progress.
Oh, well, Leo, that sounds like a great story. We should totally share more about our experiences and the fascinating cultures we are about to dive into today. Speaking of which, our topic for today is a detailed comparison between Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
That's right, folks. We're going to explore the differences between these two incredible countries and answer all the questions you might have about visiting or living in either of them. Whether you're considering moving to Moldova for its stunning wine country or Papua New Guinea for its breathtaking island scenery, we've got you covered.
Exactly. And if you're thinking of marrying someone from either country, or just want to learn more about their unique customs and traditions, this podcast is for you. We'll be your comprehensive guide, helping you make informed decisions and providing you with a deeper understanding of these two fascinating nations.
So, sit back, relax, and get ready for a wild ride as we explore the contrasts and similarities between Moldova and Papua New Guinea. From their rich histories to their vibrant cultures, we'll leave no stone unturned. And, as always, we'll do it with our signature blend of humor, wit, and enthusiasm.
That's right. Leo. And before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you to our amazing audience for tuning in and being part of this journey with us. Your support means the world, and we're honored to have you along for the ride. So let's dive into general safety and crime rates in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree that safety is a top concern for tourists and locals alike.
Absolutely. Mira, I've heard that Moldova has a relatively low crime rate compared to other Eastern European countries. But, of course, there are still petty thefts and scams to watch out for.
That's true, Leo. And I've noticed that Moldova's capital, Chisinau, is generally considered safe, with low levels of violent crime. However, as with any city, you should still be mindful of your belongings and avoid walking alone in dimly lit areas at night.
Good advice. Mira, now, let's contrast that with Papua New Guinea, which has a rather different story to tell. With a higher crime rate and instances of violent crime, tourists need to be more vigilant. I've heard that Port Moresby, the capital, is particularly notorious for its crime.
Yes, that's right. Leo, Papua New Guinea's crime rate is indeed higher, and tourists should exercise caution when traveling around the country. But it's also worth noting that the majority of crimes are opportunistic, and with some basic precautions, you can minimize your risk.
Exactly. Mira, and I think it's also important to highlight the cultural factors at play here. In Papua New Guinea, for example, there's a strong tradition of tribal loyalty, which can sometimes lead to conflicts between different groups.
That's a great point, Leo. And in Moldova, there's a strong sense of community and social cohesion, which contributes to its relatively low crime rate. It's fascinating to see how these cultural factors shape the safety and crime landscape in each country.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think our listeners would agree that understanding these cultural nuances is crucial when traveling to or living in these countries. By the way, have you heard about the police in Moldova? I've heard they're quite friendly and helpful.
Not so. Yes, I've heard that too. Leo, in fact, I met some Moldovan police officers who were incredibly kind and welcoming. But, of course, that's not to say that you should let your guard down entirely. Always be mindful of your surroundings and trust your instincts.
Last wise words. Mira, and I think we can both agree that, despite the differences in crime rates, both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have their own unique charms and attractions. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Lars, absolutely. Leo, and I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this topic. Do you have any personal experiences or anecdotes about safety and crime in these countries? Share them with us.
Well, I do have one story. Mira, I was traveling in Papua New Guinea a few years ago, and I had a rather interesting experience with a local taxi driver. Let's just say that it was a wild ride, and I learned to always negotiate the fare beforehand.
Lasso. Well, that sounds like quite an adventure. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Maybe we can share some of our own travel stories in future episodes.
Sounds like a plan. Mira, and before we wrap up this topic, I just want to remind our listeners that safety is a top priority when traveling to any country. Do your research. Stay informed, and always trust your instincts.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this conversation, and we'll catch you all in the next episode. Let's dive into the fascinating world of politics and social harmony, shall we? We're comparing Moldova and Papua New Guinea, two countries that couldn't be more different. Leo, have you ever wondered how a country's government and community relations shape the expat experience?
Great question. Mira, I mean, think about it, politics can be like a roller coaster ride, and social harmony is like the glue that holds everything together. In Moldova, for instance, they've got a parliamentary democracy, which is quite stable, but also quite complex. The president is the head of state, and the prime minister is the head of government. It's like a game of musical chairs, but with more suits and ties.
Lars, that's a great analogy. Leo, and you're right. Moldova's government is quite stable, which is a major draw for expats. But what about Papua New Guinea? How does their system work?
Well, Papua New Guinea is a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy, with the Queen of England as the head of state. Yeah, I know. It's a bit confusing, but basically, the Prime Minister is the one who runs the show. And let me tell you, it's a real show. They've got a reputation for being one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Chuckles.
Giggles, oh. Leo, you're such a diplomat. But seriously, corruption is a major issue in Papua New Guinea. The country is also working hard to improve its governance and transparency. And on the social harmony front, Papua New Guinea is known for its vibrant cultural diversity, over 800 languages spoken, and a rich tradition of storytelling and music.
That's amazing. Mira, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned cultural diversity, because that's something that Moldova also prides itself on. They've got a rich history of folk music and dance, and a strong sense of national identity. But at the same time, they're also a relatively new country. They declared independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. So they're still figuring out who they are and where they fit in the world.
Exactly. Leo. And I think that's something that expats can really relate to, the sense of uncertainty and exploration. But, at the same time, Moldova is also a country that's deeply rooted in tradition and history. They've got a beautiful old town in Chisinau, with cobblestone streets and historic buildings. It's like stepping back in time.
Laughs, yeah. I can imagine. And I think that's something that Papua New Guinea could learn from preserving its history and culture, while also embracing modernity and progress. But at the same time, Papua New Guinea has its own unique strengths, like its stunning natural beauty and its vibrant arts scene. I mean, have you seen the traditional bilam bags they make there? They're like works of art.
Smiling, ah. Yes, the bilam bags are definitely a highlight. And I think it's great that you mentioned the art scene, Leo, because that's something that both countries could learn from each other. Moldova has a rich tradition of folk music and dance, while Papua New Guinea has its own unique style of storytelling and performance art. Maybe they could even collaborate on a project or two.
Excited, Leo. That would be amazing. Mira. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that Jet Off. IAI is all about bringing people and cultures together and celebrating our differences. So, if you're interested in learning more about Moldova and Papua New Guinea, be sure to check out our resources on Jet Off. Yeah. And as always, thanks for tuning into our podcast. We'll catch you in the next episode.
So, let's talk about the economic conditions and costs of living in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever thought about how much a bottle of wine costs in Moldova?
Actually, I have. Yeah, Moldova is known for its wine production, and it's pretty affordable. A good bottle of wine can cost around 5-10 euros. But, of course, the cost of living in Moldova is generally quite low.
That's right. Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. But it's also a great destination for expats who want to experience a unique culture without breaking the bank. Rent, food, and transportation are all relatively cheap. But, on the other hand, Papua New Guinea is a different story.
Oh, yeah. Papua New Guinea is a developing country with a relatively high cost of living. The country has a lot of natural resources, but the economy is still largely dependent on foreign aid. As a result, the cost of living in Papua New Guinea can be quite high, especially in the capital city, Port Moresby.
Exactly. Port Moresby is one of the most expensive cities in the Pacific region. Housing, in particular, can be very costly. But, on the other hand, the city also offers a lot of opportunities for expats who work in the mining or oil and gas industries.
That's true. And, of course, Papua New Guinea has a lot of natural beauty, from the islands to the highlands. But, as an expat, you need to be prepared for a relatively high cost of living and some challenges in terms of infrastructure and services.
Absolutely. So if you're considering moving to either Moldova or Papua New Guinea, it's essential to do your research and plan carefully. But, in general, I think both countries offer a unique experience for expats who are willing to adapt and be flexible.
I agree. And, hey, if you're looking for a cheap bottle of wine, Moldova might be the way to go. But, seriously, both countries have their pros and cons, and it's essential to weigh those carefully before making a decision.
Well, I think that's a great point to end on. Thanks for chatting with me about economic conditions and costs of living in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
No problem. Mira, it's always fun to chat with you about these topics. And, hey, if our listeners have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them with us.
Alright, let's dive into accommodation options and quality in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm curious. Leo, what do you think our listeners would expect from these countries in terms of housing?
Well, Mira, I think they'd be surprised to find that Moldova has a relatively developed housing market, especially in Chisinau. You can find everything from modern apartments to cozy old houses, and even some Soviet-era blocks.
That's right. And I think the prices are quite reasonable, too. I mean, you can get a one-bedroom apartment in the city center for around 200-300 euros per month. Not bad, right?
Exactly. And it's not just the prices that are attractive. Moldova's also got a pretty relaxed atmosphere, so you can really feel at home. Plus, the people are super friendly.
Now, let's compare that to Papua New Guinea. I think our listeners would be shocked to find out that PNG has one of the most expensive housing markets in the Pacific. I mean, you're looking at prices similar to those in major cities like Sydney or Melbourne.
Whoa, that's crazy. And it's not just the prices that are a challenge. PNG's also got a pretty limited housing supply, especially in Port Moresby. You might have to wait months or even years to find a decent place.
Yeah, and it's not just about finding a place to live. The quality of housing in PNG can be a real issue. 2. You might have to deal with things like power outages, water shortages, and even security concerns.
That's true. But, on the other hand, PNG's also got some amazing opportunities for expats who are willing to take the plunge. You can find some incredible traditional houses, or even build your own place in a rural area.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique cultural experiences when it comes to accommodation. In Moldova, you might find yourself living in a historic house with ornate decorations, while in PNG, you might be staying in a traditional hut made from natural materials.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes these countries so fascinating. You can really immerse yourself in the local culture, even in your daily life. So, what do you think? Mira? Are our listeners ready to take the plunge and start exploring these accommodation options?
Well, I think we've definitely given them some food for thought. And who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will be inspired to move to Moldova or PNG and start a new adventure. If you're thinking of making the move, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. And don't forget to check out our podcast notes for more information on accommodation options and quality in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. We'll be back soon with more comparisons and insights.
When it comes to visas and immigration, I think it's safe to say that Moldova and Papua New Guinea have different approaches. Moldova, being a European country, has a relatively straightforward process for obtaining a visa, especially for EU citizens. Who doesn't love a good Schengen visa?
Indeed. But, Mira, let's not forget that Moldova also has a pretty relaxed attitude towards tourism visas. You can get a visa on arrival, and it's usually valid for up to 90 days. Not bad, right?
Exactly. And, Leo, I think that's one of the reasons why Moldova is becoming a popular destination for digital nomads and remote workers. The country is trying to make it easier for foreigners to come and work there, which is great for the economy. But, of course, there are still some bureaucratic hurdles to jump through.
Yes. The infamous bureaucracy. Well, Mira, it's in Papua New Guinea. Things are a bit more complicated. The country has a pretty strict visa policy, and it can take a while to get everything sorted out. But, hey, at least the scenery is worth it, right?
Indeed it is, Leo. But, seriously, Papua New Guinea has a lot of potential for tourism and business, and the government is trying to make it easier for foreigners to invest and visit. There are still some challenges to overcome, especially when it comes to official procedures.
Absolutely. Mira, in Papua New Guinea, you need to have a sponsor or an employer who can vouch for you, and the process can take several months. And, of course, there's always the risk of delays in bureaucratic red tape.
Don't even get me started on red tape, Leo. But, in all seriousness, I think it's great that both countries are trying to improve their visa and immigration processes. It's not always easy, but it's worth it in the end.
Indeed it is. Mira. And, hey, at least we can all agree that the scenery in both countries is worth the hassle. Who wouldn't want to visit the rolling hills of Moldova or the stunning beaches of Papua New Guinea?
Exactly. Leo. And I think that's what it's all about, finding the right balance between bureaucracy and beauty. Maybe we should start a petition to make visa procedures more efficient worldwide.
Now that's an idea I can get behind. Mira, but in all seriousness, I think it's great that we're having this conversation. It's always important to share our experiences and tips with each other, especially when it comes to navigating complex bureaucracy.
Absolutely. Leo. And, hey, if you're listening to this podcast and Have any tips or stories to share about visa procedures in Moldova or Papua New Guinea? Please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations about travel, culture, and bureaucracy. Just kidding about that last one. But seriously, thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Indeed. Thanks for listening. And we'll catch you all in the next episode. Alright, let's dive into the world of healthcare in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that accessing quality healthcare can be a challenge.
Absolutely. Mira, in Moldova, for instance, the public healthcare system is generally considered to be underfunded and understaffed. However, it's not all doom and gloom. The country has made significant strides in improving its healthcare infrastructure, especially in the capital city of Chisinau.
That's true. Leo, and it's interesting to note that Moldova has a relatively high life expectancy rate, with an average of 71 years. The country still struggles with a high rate of infant mortality, which is a concern.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, isn't it? On the other hand, Papua New Guinea has a much more complex healthcare landscape. The country faces significant challenges in terms of accessing healthcare services, particularly in rural areas.
Exactly. In Papua New Guinea, many people rely on traditional medicine and spiritual healing practices, which can be effective in some cases, but not always. The country also has a high rate of infectious diseases, such as malaria and tuberculosis.
And let's not forget about the cultural nuances. Nira, in Papua New Guinea, for example, there's a strong emphasis on community-based healthcare, where patients often receive treatment and support from their families and communities.
That's a great point. Leo, in Moldova, on the other hand, there's a more individualistic approach to healthcare, where patients often rely on their own resources and networks to access medical care.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how different cultural contexts shape healthcare systems. And speaking of healthcare systems, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the role of technology in improving healthcare outcomes. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Good one. Leo, and actually, that's a great topic for our next discussion. But for now, let's get back to Moldova and Papua New Guinea. In terms of patient experiences, what do you think is the most significant challenge that patients face in these countries?
Well, Mira, I think one of the biggest challenges is the lack of access to specialized medical care. In both countries, patients often have to travel long distances to access specialized treatment, which can be a significant burden.
Absolutely. Leo, and it's not just about access to care. It's also about the quality of care. In Papua New Guinea, for example, there's a shortage of trained healthcare professionals, which can affect the quality of care that patients receive.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. But despite these challenges, there are many dedicated healthcare professionals in both countries who are working hard to improve healthcare outcomes.
That's true, Leo. And it's heartening to see that there are many initiatives underway to improve healthcare access and quality in both Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
Absolutely, Mira. And as always, we'd love to hear from our listeners about their experiences with healthcare in these countries. If you have any stories or insights to share, please let us know in the comments.
All right, let's dive into transportation infrastructure and convenience. I bet our listeners in Moldova can relate to this topic. How's the public transit in Chisinau? Leo?
Well, Lira, in Moldova, the capital's public transportation is pretty decent. They have an extensive network of buses and trolleybuses, which are quite affordable. But, let's be honest, it's not the most modern fleet in the world.
That's fair. I've heard the roads can be a bit rough, especially outside the city. What about renting a car? Is that a viable option for tourists?
Actually, Mira, renting a car in Moldova can be a good idea, especially if you want to explore the countryside. However, be prepared for some bumpy roads and occasional traffic chaos.
Traffic chaos. Huh? I bet our listeners in Papua New Guinea can definitely relate to that. So, Leo, how does Papua New Guinea's transportation infrastructure compare to Moldova's?
Wow, that's a great question. Mira, Papua New Guinea has a very different transportation landscape, with limited paved roads and a rugged terrain. Traveling can be quite challenging, but the country has made significant investments in its aviation sector, making air travel a popular option.
That's really interesting. I heard that Papua New Guinea has some of the most beautiful and remote islands in the world. But how do people get around on those islands?
Ah, great point. Mira, in Papua New Guinea, island hopping is a common practice, and people often rely on boats and ferries to get around. It's not the fastest way to travel, but it's definitely a scenic one.
I can imagine. And what about safety concerns? I've heard that Papua New Guinea has a high crime rate, especially in Port Moresby.
Yes, that's true. Mira, safety is a concern in Papua New Guinea, especially for solo travelers. But with some basic precautions and an understanding of the local culture, visitors can have a safe and enjoyable experience.
That's reassuring to hear. Leo, and finally, what about Moldova's safety record? Are there any concerns for tourists?
Actually, Mira, Moldova is considered a relatively safe country for tourists. Of course, as with any travel destination, it's always a good idea to take some basic precautions and be aware of your surroundings.
Great. Thanks for the tip. Leo, and to our listeners, if you've got any tips or stories about transportation in Moldova or Papua New Guinea, be sure to share them with us in the comments below.
Absolutely. Mira, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more travel tips and adventures.
Hey, Leo, to language barriers and ease of communication in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this.
Ah, language. The universal barrier, right? Last in Moldova, the official language is Romanian, but you'll also hear Russian, Ukrainian, and Gagauzia spoken. It's a linguistic melting pot.
That's fascinating. And in Papua New Guinea, there are 800 languages spoken, which is roughly 12% of the world's total languages. Talk about diversity. But, Leo, I've heard that English is the official language, right?
That's correct. English is the official language. But Tok Pisin and Hirimodu are also widely spoken. And, fun fact, Papua New Guinea has the highest language density in the world. Chuckles, can you imagine having to learn 800 languages to communicate with your neighbors?
Last year. That's mind-boggling. In Moldova, I've heard that many people speak Russian as a second language, especially among the older generation. But, Leon, how does that affect communication for expats or tourists?
Well, Mira, in Moldova, many younger people speak some English, especially in the service industry, so tourists can get by. But if you venture into the countryside, Russian or Romanian might be more helpful. And, of course, there's always Google Translate to save the day.
Larsa. Yes. The trusty Google Translate. In Papua New Guinea, I've heard that Tok Pisin is a pidgin language that's widely used for communication among people from different language groups. But, Leo, how does that work in practice?
Tok Pisin is a remarkable language. It's a simplified language that's easy to learn, and it's used as a lingua franca to facilitate communication among people from different language groups. So, even if you don't speak the local language, you can still communicate with locals using Tok Pisin.
That's really cool. And, Leo, I've heard that Papua New Guinea has a strong oral tradition, with storytelling and singing being an important part of the culture. How does that affect communication styles?
Yes, in Papua New Guinea, storytelling and singing are used to convey important messages and values. And, in fact, the country has a rich tradition of storytelling through music and dance. So, communication is not just about speaking a language, but also about understanding the cultural context and nuances.
That's so true. And, Leo, I think that's something that expats and tourists can learn from. By embracing the local culture and language, we can build bridges and foster greater understanding.
Absolutely. Mira. And I think that's what makes traveling and living in a foreign country so rewarding. We learn to adapt, to communicate in new ways, and to appreciate the beauty of language and culture.
Well, Leo, I think that's a great note to end on. Language barriers may exist, but with a little effort and curiosity, we can overcome them and connect with people from all walks of life.
Smirks and... there's always Google Translate to help us out. Laughs.
When we think about cultural diversity and tolerance, two countries come to mind: Moldova and Papua New Guinea. Both have unique approaches to embracing differences and fostering social cohesion.
That's right. Mira, Moldova, with its blend of Eastern European and Soviet influences, has a rich cultural heritage. But have you ever heard of the Basaria Ben Bulgarians? They're an ethnic group in Moldova with their own language and traditions.
Ah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. And I'm certain that Alice living in Moldova would agree with me that the country's cultural diversity is a strength. But what about Papua New Guinea? How does it compare?
Well, Papua New Guinea is a country with over 800 languages spoken. That's about 12% of the world's total languages. It's a melting pot of cultures, with many different tribes and traditions. And did you know that they have a Sing festival, where different tribes come together to dance and sing?
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'd love to attend a Sing festival one day. But I'm curious, Leo, how do you think Moldova and Papua New Guinea approach social harmony initiatives?
That's a great question. Mira, Moldova has a number of initiatives aimed at promoting social cohesion, such as the Moldovan Diversity and Inclusion Project. And in Papua New Guinea, they have the PNG Tribal Foundation, which works to promote cultural exchange and understanding between different tribes.
That's really interesting. And I think it's worth noting have a strong sense of community and respect for tradition. But what about personal stories? Leo, have you come across any interesting stories of cultural exchange or tolerance in either country?
Actually, I have. I met a Moldovan woman who had married a Papua New Guinean man, and they had the most amazing story of cultural exchange. They would spend hours cooking traditional dishes together and learning about each other's customs.
Ah, that's so sweet. I love hearing stories like that. And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you've got a story of cultural exchange or tolerance, please share it with us in the comments.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have a lot to teach us about embracing differences and fostering social cohesion.
Couldn't agree more. Leo, and I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for chatting with me about cultural diversity and tolerance in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
No problem. Mira, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, let's move on to this topic. When it comes to educational opportunities and language schools, both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have unique strengths. In Moldova, the literacy rate is around 99%, which is impressive, right?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. Mira, but what about the quality of education? I've heard that Moldova's education system is still developing, especially when it comes to vocational training.
That's true, Leo. However, Moldova has made significant progress in recent years. For example, the government has introduced new programs to promote STEM education and vocational training. And, of course, there are many language schools that offer courses in Romanian, Russian, and even English.
That's interesting. I didn't know that Moldova had a strong focus on STEM education. What about Papua New Guinea? How does its education system compare to Moldova's?
Well, Papua New Guinea has a very different education system. The country has a strong emphasis on community-based education, which is great for promoting cultural heritage and traditional knowledge. The literacy rate is lower than Moldova's, around 64%.
That's a significant difference. But what about language schools in Papua New Guinea? I've heard that English is an official language, but many people also speak Tok Pisin and Hirimotu.
Exactly. Leo, Papua New Guinea is a linguistically diverse country, and language schools reflect that. You can find courses in English, Tok Pisin, and even some of the local languages like Go God Allah. And, of course, there are many opportunities for language exchange programs and cultural immersion.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about language exchange programs in Papua New Guinea. Mira, can you tell us more about that?
Sure thing. Leo, language exchange programs in Papua New Guinea are a great way to learn about the local culture and language. Many organizations offer homestay programs, where you can live with a local family and learn their language and customs.
That sounds like an incredible experience. And what about Moldova? Are there any language exchange programs or cultural immersion opportunities available?
Actually, Leo, Moldova has a great program called the Moldova Language and Culture Exchange Program, which offers opportunities for language exchange and cultural immersion. You can live with a local family and learn Romanian, Russian, or even some of the local dialects.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about that program. Mira, can you tell us more about it?
Of course. The program is designed to promote cultural exchange and language learning. You can choose from a variety of languages and live with a local family, which is a great way to immerse yourself in the culture.
That sounds like an amazing experience. And finally, Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from this conversation about educational opportunities in language schools in Moldova and Papua New Guinea?
Well, Leo, I think the most important thing is to remember that both countries have unique strengths and opportunities for language learning and cultural immersion. Whether you're interested in STEM education or community-based education, there's something for everyone in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
That's a great point. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights we've shared today. Thanks for chatting with me. Mira.
No problem. Leo, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about educational opportunities and language schools. Okay, let's dive into the fascinating world of climate and seasonal conditions in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me both places have their unique climatic features that shape lifestyle and culture.
Yes. The climate. In Moldova, you've got a temperate continental climate with cold winters and warm summers. It's like a classic European weather pattern. But, Mira, I'm curious. How does that compare to Papua New Guinea?
Well, Leo, Papua New Guinea has a tropical climate with high temperatures and humidity levels throughout the year. The country's geography, with its mountains and islands, creates a variety of microclimates. It's like a never-ending adventure. Weather-wise,
Whoa, that sounds intense. I can imagine the locals adapting to such extreme conditions. In Moldova, people are used to bundling up for winter. But in Papua New Guinea, it's more about finding ways to stay cool and dry. I've heard that the country experiences a lot of rainfall, especially in the highlands region.
exactly. Papua New Guinea is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, and the climate plays a huge role in that. The rainforests, the coral reefs, the mangrove swamps, all these ecosystems are supported by the tropical climate. And, of course, the locals have developed unique ways to live in harmony with nature.
That's fascinating. In Moldova, the climate is more predictable, with distinct seasons. The country's agriculture is heavily influenced by the climate, with crops like wheat, corn, and sunflowers being major exports. But I'm sure Papua New Guinea has its own agricultural secrets, right?
Oh, absolutely. Papua New Guinea is famous for its coffee, tea, and cocoa plantations. The climate and soil conditions are perfect for these crops, and the country is home to many small-scale farmers who rely on these exports for their livelihood. And let's not forget the traditional crops like sweet potatoes and taro.
Wow, I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. But, Mira, I'm also curious about extreme weather events in both countries. How do they cope with natural disasters like floods, droughts, or heat waves?
Great question. Leo, in Moldova, the country is prone to floods, especially in the spring when the snow melts. But the locals have developed clever ways to mitigate the damage, like building flood-resistant homes and using traditional irrigation systems.
That's impressive. In Papua New Guinea, the country is vulnerable to droughts, especially in the highlands region. The locals have developed sophisticated systems for conserving water, like rainwater harvesting and cloud forests. It's amazing to see how these communities adapt to their environment.
Exactly. And, of course, both countries have their own unique cultural practices that are influenced by the climate. In Moldova, the traditional clothing is designed to keep warm during the cold winters, while in Papua New Guinea, the traditional dress is all about keeping cool and comfortable in the tropical heat.
I can just imagine the contrast between the two. Well, Mira, it's clear that both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have their own special climate stories to tell. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think they have any favorite climate-related stories or experiences from these countries?
That's a great question. Leo, I'm sure our listeners have some fascinating stories to share. If you think this is wrong or have any insights, please let us know in the comments. Alright, let's talk about the culinary wonders of Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me when I say that traditional food plays a huge role in shaping their cultures.
That's right. Mira, Moldova is known for its hearty meat stews and soups, while Papua New Guinea is famous for its seafood and exotic fruits. But what I find interesting is how both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family when it comes to food.
Exactly. In Moldova, mealtimes are often seen as opportunities to bond with family and friends, and traditional dishes like sarmale and momoliga are always at the center of these gatherings. And in Papua New Guinea, food is often shared among communities during special occasions like weddings and festivals.
Yeah. And it's not just about the food itself, but also the way it's prepared and presented. In Papua New Guinea, for example, they have this amazing tradition of cooking food in a hole in the ground, wrapped in banana leaves. It's like a natural oven.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And in Moldova, they have a similar tradition of cooking food in a clay oven, which gives the dishes a unique flavor. But what about nutritional alternatives? Leo, how do these countries cater to people with different dietary needs?
Great question. Mira, in Papua New Guinea, they have a lot of options for vegetarians and vegans, thanks to the abundance of fruits and vegetables. And in Moldova, they have a strong tradition of preserving food through pickling and canning, which makes it easier for people with dietary restrictions to find suitable options.
That's really interesting. And what about innovative food solutions? Leo, are there any unique food technologies or trends in these countries that we should know about?
Actually, yes. In Papua New Guinea, they have this amazing initiative to use hydroponics and aquaponics to grow food, which is perfect for their climate and geography. And in Moldova, they're exploring the use of drones to monitor and manage their vineyards.
Well, that's really cool. And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you have any experience with hydroponics or drone technology in agriculture, please let us know in the comments.
And while we're on the topic of innovation, I have to ask, have you tried any of the weird and wonderful foods from these countries? Mira?
Oh, you know me. Leo? I love trying new foods, and I'm always up for a challenge. But I have to say, Some of the dishes in Papua New Guinea are definitely acquired tastes. Like, have you ever tried fried tarantulas?
No. I don't think so. But I'm sure it's an interesting experience. Maybe we can try it next time we're in Papua New Guinea?
Deal. And speaking of deals, if you're looking for more information on food, culture, and nutritional alternatives in Moldova and Papua New Guinea, be sure to check out our resources page on Jetoff. AI, thanks for tuning in. Everyone. Historical, cultural, and artistic value is my favorite topic. Let's dive into the treasures of Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me when I say that their heritage is incredibly rich.
Rich indeed. Moldova, for instance, has a fascinating blend of Eastern European and Soviet influences. The country is home to the famous Orhii Olvika monastery complex, which dates back to the 13th century. And have you seen the stunning frescoes in the cave monastery? They're like something out of a fairy tale.
Wow, that sounds breathtaking. And Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, has a unique culture, identity shaped by its tribal traditions. The country is famous for its vibrant masks, which are not only works of art, but also play a significant role in their spiritual practices. I mean, who wouldn't want to own a mask that's been passed down through generations?
Exactly. And did you know that Papua New Guinea has over 800 languages spoken within its borders? That's roughly 12% of the world's total languages. It's like a linguistic paradise. As for Moldova, they have a thriving music scene, with traditional folk songs and dances that are still performed today.
That's amazing. Music and dance are such a big part of any culture. And speaking of art, Papua New Guinea is famous for its bilim bags, which are intricately woven and tell stories of their ancestors. They're not just beautiful pieces of art, but also carry deep cultural significance. Jetoff, I love uncovering stories like this, and so do.
Absolutely. And Moldova has its own unique art forms, like the traditional pottery and ceramics that are still made using ancient techniques. You can find these beautiful pieces in the local markets, and they make for great souvenirs. But what's really interesting is how both countries have managed to preserve their cultural heritage despite being influenced by external factors.
Exactly. It's a testament to the resilience of their cultures. And I think that's what makes their historical, cultural, and artistic values so valuable. They're not just relics of the past, but living, breathing traditions that continue to shape their identities today. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think cultural heritage is important in shaping a country's identity?
That's a great question. I think it's essential. Without our cultural heritage, we'd be lost. We'd be like a tree without roots. And I love how both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have managed to stay true to their roots while still embracing modernity.
Beautifully said. Leo, and I think that's what makes their cultural values so unique. They're not just preserving the past, but also creating a new future that's rooted in their traditions. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Always keeping it interactive. Mira, but seriously, folks, if you ever get the chance to visit Moldova or Papua New Guinea, take it. Their cultural heritage is truly something to behold. And who knows, you might just discover a new favorite art from more tradition.
Absolutely. And don't forget to check out Jetoff AI for more stories like this. They're always uncovering hidden gems and cultural treasures from around the world. Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. When it comes to natural beauties, Moldova and Papua New Guinea are two countries that might not immediately come to mind. But trust me, they have some hidden gems. In Moldova, you have the stunning Cellars Reserve, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with its lush forests and rolling hills. It's like a fairy tale come true.
That's right, Mira. and Papua New Guinea has its own share of breathtaking landscapes. The Balian Valley, for instance, is a treasure trove of traditional cultures and stunning natural beauty, with its towering mountains and lush valleys. It's like a lost world, untouched by time.
Exactly. And have you ever heard of the Hialvik, a monastery complex in Moldova? It's an ancient cave monastery carved into the limestone cliffs, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. You feel like you're walking into a medieval fairy tale.
Wow, that sounds incredible. Papua New Guinea has its own unique geological wonders, like the mighty Sepik River, which winds its way through the heart of the country. And let's not forget the stunning islands of the Bismarck Archipelago, with their crystal clear waters and coral reefs teeming with marine life.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Papua New Guinea would agree with me that the country's diverse ecosystems are truly remarkable. From the tropical rainforests of the highlands to the mangrove forests of the coastal regions, there's no shortage of natural beauty to explore.
That's right. Mira. And Moldova's not just about wine and monasteries. You know, the country's also home to some stunning waterfalls, like the Saharna waterfall, which is surrounded by lush forests and offers breathtaking views. It's like a hidden oasis in the heart of Europe.
I'm glad you mentioned the wine. Leo, Moldova's famous wine country is definitely worth exploring, with its rolling vineyards and picturesque villages. But back to Papua New Guinea, have you ever heard of the infamous birds of paradise? These stunning creatures are found only in Papua New Guinea and are a sight to behold.
Ah, yes. The birds of paradise are legendary. Mira. And Papua New Guinea is also home to some of the most incredible traditional festivals in the world, like the Sing Sing, where tribes gather to showcase their vibrant costumes and dances. It's like a kaleidoscope of color and sound.
That sounds amazing. Leo, I'm actually curious about what others think about this. Have you ever been to a traditional festival in Papua New Guinea or Moldova? Share your experiences with us in the comments.
And finally, Mira. Let's not forget the stunning sunsets in both countries. In Moldova, you can watch the sunset over the rolling hills of the countryside. While in Papua New Guinea, you can witness the sky turn pink and orange over the towering mountains. It's like nature's own work of art.
Ah, what a perfect way to end our conversation about natural beauties. Leo, if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments, but I think we can both agree that Moldova and Papua New Guinea are two countries that will leave you in awe of their natural beauty. You know, Leo, when we think about sports and adventure, two countries that might not immediately come to mind are Moldova and Papua New Guinea. But trust me, they both have their own unique ways of getting your heart racing.
Ah, Moldova, the land of wine and, well, more wine. But, seriously, Mira, they do have a pretty cool outdoor scene. From hiking in the Kodru Forest to exploring the Dniester River, there are plenty of opportunities to get your adventure fix.
Exactly. And did you know that Moldova has a growing extreme sports scene? You can go paragliding, rock climbing, or even bungee jumping in some areas. It's not exactly what you'd expect from a country known for its wine production.
That's true. But Papua New Guinea takes the cake when it comes to adventure. I mean, have you heard of the Kokoda Trek? It's one of the most challenging treks in the world, with steep mountains, dense jungle, and even the occasional crocodile encounter.
Whoa, that sounds intense. But Papua New Guinea also has some amazing opportunities for water sports, like surfing and snorkeling. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can even try your hand at shark diving.
Shark diving? You're crazy. Mira. But I do have to admit, the idea of exploring the coral reefs and shipwrecks in Papua New Guinea is pretty tempting. And speaking of water sports, Moldova has its own share of exciting activities, like kayaking and drafting on the Purut River.
That's right. And if you're looking for something a bit more relaxing, both countries have some amazing opportunities for horseback riding and cycling. You can explore the rolling hills and countryside of Moldova or take a easily bike ride through the villages of Papua New Guinea.
I'm starting to get a little jealous. Mira, I think I need to plan a trip to one of these countries ASAP. But before I do, I have to ask, what about national sports? Do either of these countries have any unique or popular sports that we should know about?
Great question. Leo, in Moldova, the national sport is actually wrestling. They have a pretty strong team and have even won a few international competitions.
Wrestling? Huh? That's not exactly what I'd expect from a country with such a rich wine culture. But I suppose it's a great way to work off all those calories from drinking wine.
Not exactly. And in Papua New Guinea, the national sport is actually rugby. They have a pretty passionate fan base and have even competed in international tournaments.
Rugby? That's a tough sport. I can see why it would be popular in a country with such a strong warrior culture. But I have to say, I'm a bit surprised that soccer isn't the national sport in either country.
Yeah, that's a good point. Leo, soccer is actually pretty popular in both countries. But I think rugby and wrestling just have a special place in the hearts of the Moldovans and Papua New Guineans.
Well, there you have it. Folks, if you're looking for a country with a unique blend of adventure and sports, Moldova and Papua New Guinea might just be the place for you. And who knows, you might even discover a new national sport or two.
Maths, exactly. And if you're feeling adventurous, be sure to try some of the local sports and activities. Just don't forget to bring your sense of humor and a good dose of humility.
Last words of wisdom. Mira, thanks for joining me on this episode of our podcast. Until next time, stay adventurous and keep on laughing.
Let's talk about nightlife in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm curious about what our listeners think about these two countries when it comes to after-hours entertainment.
Great topic. Mira, I've got some thoughts on that. In Moldova, you've got a pretty vibrant nightlife scene, especially in Chisinau. The capital city has a mix of modern clubs, bars, and traditional wine cellars.
That sounds like a great combination. I've heard that Moldovans love their wine, so it's no surprise that wine cellars are a part of their nightlife. But what about Papua New Guinea? I've got a feeling that their nightlife might be a bit more unconventional.
Laughs unconventional is one way to put it. In Papua New Guinea, you've got a more laid-back, traditional approach to nightlife. Think tribal gatherings, live music, and dancing under the stars.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience the kind of authentic cultural nightlife. But what about for tourists? Are there any modern nightlife spots in Papua and New Guinea that cater to visitors?
Actually, yes. Port Moresby, the capital city, has a few modern bars and clubs that are popular with tourists. But if you're looking for a truly unique experience, you should check out the traditional sing-sings. That's what they call their tribal gatherings.
Sing-sings? That sounds like a blast. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about that. And what about in Moldova? Are there any unique nightlife experiences that tourists should know about?
Well, in Moldova, you've got to try the karaoke bars. They're super popular, and the locals love to sing along to traditional Moldovan songs. It's a great way to experience the local culture and have a few laughs.
Laughs? That sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to belt out a few tunes in a Moldovan karaoke bar. But what about safety? Are there any concerns that tourists should be aware of when it comes to nightlife in either country?
Good question. Mira, in both countries, it's generally safe to go out at night. But, as with anywhere, you should take the usual precautions. In Moldova, just be aware of your surroundings, especially in crowded areas. And in Papua New Guinea, it's best to stick with a group and avoid walking alone at night.
Great advice. Leo, I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that. And finally, what's the verdict on nightlife in Moldova and Papua New Guinea? Which country comes out on top?
Last one. That's a tough one. Both countries have their unique charms. But, if I had to pick, I'd say Papua New Guinea takes the cake. There's just something about experiencing traditional tribal culture under the stars that's hard to beat.
Smirks, I see what you did there. Leo! But I think I have to disagree. Moldova's wine cellars and karaoke bars are definitely worth experiencing. Maybe our listeners can decide for themselves after all. Nightlife is all about personal preference.
That's fair enough. Mira, I think we've given our listeners a good taste of what to expect from nightlife in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
You know, when it comes to family-friendly environments, I think both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have their own unique approaches. In Moldova, for example, you'll find plenty of parks and green spaces where kids can run around and play.
That's true, Mira. And I've heard that Moldova's capital, Chisinau, has a great zoo that's perfect for families. But what about Papua New Guinea? I've always imagined it as a bit more adventurous.
Yes. Papua New Guinea is definitely a more rugged and outdoorsy destination. But that's part of its charm. Right? Kids can explore the beautiful beaches, go snorkeling or surfing, and experience the local culture firsthand.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that Papua New Guinea has some fantastic festivals and events that are great for families, like the annual Sing Sing Festival, where kids can watch traditional dance performances and learn about the local customs.
Exactly. And Moldova has its own share of festivals and events, too, like the National Wine Festival, where kids can learn about traditional winemaking and even try some grape juice. Whoa, Leo, I just thought of something. Have you ever tried Moldovan wine?
Mira, you know me too well. Of course. I've tried Moldovan wine. It's interesting. But hey, back to the topic at hand. What about childcare and education in these countries? How do they support families with young kids?
Well, in Moldova, you'll find that childcare is relatively affordable and accessible, especially in the urban areas. And the education system is pretty good. 2 kids can learn English from a young age, which is great for future opportunities.
That's great to hear. And in Papua New Guinea, I've heard that the government is working to improve access to education, especially in rural areas. But it's still a bit of a challenge, especially for families who live in remote communities.
Yes, that's true. But I think it's great that both countries are making an effort to support families and children. Then hey, if you're a family planning to move to either country, I'm sure you'll find that the locals are very welcoming and supportive.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our listeners can really appreciate, the sense of community and support that you find in both Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
Exactly. So, to all our listeners out there who are considering a move to either country, I say don't be afraid to reach out to the local community and ask for help. And who knows, you might just find yourself dancing at a traditional festival or sipping Moldovan wine with the locals.
Laugh cheers to that. Mira, and to our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode of our podcast. If you have any thoughts or questions about family-friendly environments in Moldova and Papua New Guinea, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
When it comes to LGBT-friendly atmospheres, Moldova and Papua New Guinea have quite different stories to tell. In Moldova, we see a mix of traditional values and a growing awareness of LGBT rights. It's like they're slowly opening the door to a more inclusive party.
That's a great way to put it. Mira, in Moldova, the capital city, Chisinau, has hosted several pride events in recent years, which is a big step forward. However, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of legal protections and social acceptance.
Exactly. And that's where Papua New Guinea comes in, a country with a very different cultural context. In PNG, traditional values and customs play a significant role in shaping societal attitudes towards LGBT individuals. It's a bit like trying to navigate a complex web of relationships and expectations.
Yeah, it's true. In Papua New Guinea, same-sex relationships are still criminalized, and there's a lot of stigma surrounding LGBT individuals. However, there are also some amazing stories of resilience and community building within the LGBT community. It's like they're creating their own safe spaces and support networks.
That's so true. Leo, And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of local organizations and activists working tirelessly to promote LGBT rights in both countries. In Moldova, for example, there are groups like Gender.n, which provide vital support and resources for the LGBT community.
Absolutely. Mira, and in Papua New Guinea, organizations like the PNG Human Rights Commission are doing crucial work in advocating for the rights of marginalized communities, including LGBT individuals. It's like they're shining a light on the importance of inclusivity and respect.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me when I say that there's still a long way to go in terms of achieving true equality and acceptance. But it's heartening to see progress, no matter how small. Every step forward is like a little dance move towards a more inclusive party.
I love that. Mira, and I think it's essential to remember that LGBT-friendly atmospheres are not just about laws and policies. They're also about creating a culture of acceptance and understanding. In both Moldova and Papua New Guinea, there's a need for ongoing education and awareness-raising efforts to promote inclusivity and respect.
Well said, Leah. And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you think there's more we can do to support LGBT communities in these countries, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas.
Absolutely, Mira. And as we wrap up this conversation, I just want to say that it's been an incredible journey exploring the LGBT-friendly atmospheres in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. There's so much to learn from these countries, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share their stories with our listeners.
Me too. Leo, it's been a blast chatting with you about this topic. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay fabulous and keep on dancing towards a more inclusive world. You know, when it comes to hospitality, some countries really stand out. I'm thinking of Moldova. For instance, their traditional welcome is warm and fuzzy. Literally, they'll offer you a shot of 3K, a strong fruit brandy, and some delicious sawmeal, stuffed cabbage rolls. It's like they're saying, "Hey, we're glad you're here. Let's get this party started."
Moldova. I've heard their hospitality is top-notch. But let's compare it to Papua New Guinea, where I've had some amazing experiences. In PNG, they have this concept of 1OK, which roughly translates to one talk or a language. It's all about building relationships and connections with others. When you're welcomed into a community, you're essentially becoming part of the family.
That's beautiful. I can see how that would create strong bonds between people. In Moldova, they also have a strong sense of community, but it's more about sharing food and drink. Speaking of which, have you ever tried monoliga? Their traditional polenta? It's like a warm hug in a bowl.
Laughs, I think I need to try that. But, going back to PNG, I was struck by how open and curious the people are. They're always eager to learn about your culture and share their own stories. It's a real two-way street, you know? And, of course, there's the famous PNG smile. It's infectious.
Last I've heard about that smile, it's like they're saying, "Hey, we're happy to see you, and we're not afraid to show it." In Moldova, they're a bit more reserved, but once you break the ice, they're incredibly warm and welcoming. I'm certain that our listeners living in Moldova would agree with me on that.
Absolutely. And in PNG, they have this wonderful tradition of singing and dancing. When you're welcomed into a village, they'll often perform a traditional sing-sing, which is just incredible. It's like they're saying, "We're glad you're here. Let's celebrate."
That sounds amazing. I love how music and dance bring people together. In Moldova, they have a rich folk music tradition, but it's more subdued. Maybe we can get some PNG-style sing-sing going in Moldova. Mass.
Why not? I think that would be a great cultural exchange. But, seriously, both countries have their unique ways of showing hospitality. PNG is all about building relationships, while Moldova is more about sharing food and drink. Maybe we can learn from each other.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe our listeners can share their own experiences of hospitality in these countries. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Laughs always love a good discussion. And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have you ever had an experience of hospitality that really stood out to you?
Let's dive into the world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm curious. Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Moldova's digital landscape?
Well, Mira, Moldova has been making significant strides in its digital transformation. With a high level of internet penetration, around 70%, it's no wonder Moldova has become a hub for IT outsourcing and software development.
That's impressive. I've heard that Moldova has a strong focus on e-government services, making it easier for citizens to access public services online. But how does this compare to Papua New Guinea, which has a relatively low internet penetration rate of around 13%?
Great point. Mira, Papua New Guinea's digital landscape is indeed very different. With limited internet access, especially in rural areas, the country faces significant challenges in terms of digital inclusion. However, there are efforts underway to improve internet connectivity, such as the rollout of 4G networks and the development of digital literacy programs.
I see. It's interesting to note that Papua New Guinea has a growing number of digital nomads and remote workers. Despite the limited internet infrastructure, perhaps this is an opportunity for the country to develop innovative solutions to bridge the digital divide.
Exactly. And Moldova, on the other hand, has a thriving startup ecosystem, with many incubators and accelerators supporting the growth of tech startups. It's an exciting time for both countries, and I think we can learn a lot from each other's approaches to digital development.
Absolutely. I'm certain that our listeners living in Moldova would agree with me that the country's digital transformation has had a significant impact on its economy and society. But what about Papua New Guinea? Leo, how do you think the country's digital landscape will evolve in the next few years?
Well, Mira, I think Papua New Guinea has a lot of potential for growth, especially with the government's focus on developing the country's digital economy. With the right investments and policies in place, I'm optimistic that Papua New Guinea can make significant strides in improving its internet infrastructure and digital facilities.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I think our listeners would be interested to know more about the initiatives underway to improve digital inclusion in Papua New Guinea. Perhaps we could explore some of these initiatives in more detail.
Sounds like a plan. Mira, and I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you think there are any other countries that are doing innovative things in terms of digital development, please let us know in the comments.
Great idea, Leo. And I think we can both agree that digital development is a complex and multifaceted issue, requiring a nuanced approach that takes into account the unique needs and challenges of each country.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think that's what makes this conversation so interesting. We're not just comparing the countries. We're exploring the complexities of digital development and how it impacts people's lives.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
No problem. Mira, it's been a blast chatting with you. As always.
I have to say, shopping in Moldova is like a treasure hunt. You never know what unique finds you'll stumble upon. From traditional handicrafts to handmade clothing, there's a lot of character in their markets.
But yeah, I've heard great things about Moldova's markets. But let's not forget about Papua New Guinea. Their traditional bilam bags are a must-have for any shopper. The intricate patterns and colors are just incredible.
That's true. But in Moldova, you can find some amazing deals on wine and cognac. And if you're looking for something truly unique, check out their traditional fight clothing. It's like wearing a piece of history.
Laughs, yeah. I can see you rocking a traditional Moldovan outfit. Mira, but seriously, Papua New Guinea has some amazing local markets. Like the one in Port Moresby. You can find everything from fresh produce to handmade carvings.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about shopping in Papua New Guinea. Do you guys have any experience with their markets? Let us know in the comments.
Smirks, I think our listeners would agree that shopping in Papua New Guinea can be a bit of an adventure. But hey, that's all part of the fun, right? And speaking of fun, have you tried shopping in Moldova's capital city, Chisinau? It's like a mix of old and new. You can find everything from Soviet-era souvenirs to modern boutiques.
Lasso. Yeah, Chisinau is definitely a shopper's paradise. But I think what really sets Moldova apart is its price-performance balance. You can find some amazing deals on high-quality products without breaking the bank.
That's true. But Papua New Guinea has its own unique advantage. The prices are generally lower, and you can often negotiate the price. It's like a game, trying to get the best deal possible.
Smirks, yeah. I can see you as a master negotiator. Leo. But seriousness. Both countries offer some amazing shopping opportunities. And if you're looking for something truly unique, consider shopping during their local festivals. You can find some incredible one-of-a-kind items.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes shopping in Moldova and Papua New Guinea so special, the unique cultural experiences you can have. Whether it's trying traditional food, watching local performances, or simply browsing the markets, it's an adventure you'll never forget.
So, to all our listeners out there, if you're looking for a unique shopping experience, consider adding Moldova and Papua New Guinea to your bucket list. And don't forget to share your own shopping adventures with us on social media. We'd love to hear about them.
Smirks, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll even have a shopping trip to one of these countries. Winks, wouldn't that be something?
Dive into the world of cultural events, festivals, and concert opportunities in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm curious. Leo, what do you know about Moldova's cultural scene?
Well, Mira, Moldova has a rich cultural heritage, with a blend of Romanian and Soviet influences. One of the most famous festivals is the National Wine Festival, which celebrates the country's famous wine production. It's a great time to visit, with wine tastings, traditional music, and delicious food.
That sounds amazing. I love wine. And I'm sure our listeners do too. But what about Papua New Guinea? I've heard their cultural events are quite unique.
Papua New Guinea is a treasure trove of cultural diversity. The country has over 800 languages and more than one. So, I think that we can conquer that, making it one of the most culturally rich countries in the world. One of the most famous festivals is the Goroka Show, which showcases traditional music, dance, and costumes from all over the country.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I've always been fascinated by traditional costumes and music. But I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the music scene in both countries. Leo, can you tell us about Moldova's music scene?
Sure thing. Mira, Moldova has a thriving music scene, with a mix of traditional folk music and modern genres like rock and pop. One of the most famous Moldovan musicians is Natalia Barbu, who represented the country in the Eurovision Song Contest.
That's great. I love Eurovision. And what about Papua New Guinea? I've heard their traditional music is quite unique.
Yes. Papua New Guinea has a rich tradition of music and dance, with a focus on percussion and storytelling. The country is home to many talented musicians, including the famous PNG String Band, which combines traditional instruments with modern styles.
That sounds amazing. I love the idea of combining traditional instruments with modern styles. And speaking of modern styles, I've heard that Papua New Guinea has a thriving contemporary art scene.
That's right. Mira, Papua New Guinea has a vibrant contemporary art scene, with many talented artists showcasing their work in galleries and exhibitions around the country. One of the most famous artists is Julie Mackenzie, who creates stunning paintings and sculptures inspired by traditional PNG culture.
That's fantastic. I love discovering new artists and art styles. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural events and festivals in both countries. Leo, can you tell us about some of the other festivals and events in Moldova?
Well, Mira, Moldova has a lot to offer when it comes to cultural events and festivals. One of the most popular festivals is the Orhiao Festival, which takes place in the historic town of Orhiao. The festival features traditional music, dance, and food, as well as stunning views of the surrounding countryside.
That sounds beautiful. And what about Papua New Guinea? I've heard their festivals are quite colorful and vibrant.
Ah, yes. Papua New Guinea is famous for its colorful festivals and events, including the Hirimoel Festival, which celebrates the country's traditional sailing canoes. The festival features stunning costumes, music, and dance, as well as traditional sailing canoe racing.
That's incredible. I love the idea of traditional sailing canoe racing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural events and festivals in both countries. Leo, can you tell us about some of the other cultural events and festivals in Papua New Guinea?
Well, Mira, Papua New Guinea has a lot to offer when it comes to cultural events and festivals. One of the most popular festivals is the Mount Hagen Cultural Show, which takes place in the Western Highlands province. The festival features traditional music, dance, and costumes from all over the country, as well as stunning views of the surrounding mountains.
That sounds amazing. I love the idea of traditional music and dance in the mountains. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural events and festivals in both countries. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Leo?
No problem. Mira, it's always a pleasure to share my knowledge with our listeners. And remember, folks, if you want to learn more about cultural events and festivals in Moldova and Papua New Guinea, be sure to check out Jetov AI for more information.
Absolutely. Jetov AI is a great resource for anyone interested in cultural events and festivals around the world. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we'll see you next time on our podcast. When it comes to learning the local language, Moldova and Papua New Guinea offer vastly different experiences. In Moldova, you can easily find language schools and courses in Romanian and Russian, the two most widely spoken languages.
That's true, Mira. And Moldova's language schools often cater to foreigners, especially those interested in business and international relations. However, I've heard that the language barrier can be quite significant in rural areas, where Romanian and Russian may not be as widely spoken.
Exactly. But that's where cultural immersion comes in. Living with a host family or participating in language exchange programs can help you pick up the language quickly. And, of course, there's always the option of learning some basic phrases in Romanian and Russian, like hello and thank you.
Yeah, because nothing breaks the ice like saying hello in a language you're not fluent in. In Papua New Guinea, the situation is quite different. With over 800 languages spoken across the country, it's a language learner's paradise, or nightmare, depending on how you look at it.
Laugh, that's so true. Leah! But seriously, Papua New Guinea's linguistic diversity is a major challenge for language learners. Many locals speak English, especially in urban areas, so it's not impossible to get by without speaking the local language.
Yeah, but if you're interested in learning one of the local languages, like Tok Pisin or Hirimodu, you'll need to put in some serious effort. There aren't many language schools or courses available, so you'll need to rely on language exchange programs or self-study.
That's a great point, Leah. And it's not just about the language itself, but also the cultural context. In Papua New Guinea, language is closely tied to culture and tradition. Learning the language is also about learning about the culture.
Absolutely. And that's what makes learning a language so rewarding, right? It's not just about communicating with locals, but also about understanding their way of life.
Exactly. And I think that's what our listeners would agree with. I mean, who doesn't love learning a new language and immersing themselves in a different culture?
Well, I'm sure there are some who would disagree, but I think you're right. Mira, learning a language is a great way to broaden your horizons and challenge yourself.
So, to sum it up, both Moldova and Papua New Guinea offer unique opportunities for language learners, but with different challenges and rewards. In Moldova, You can easily find language schools and courses, but cultural immersion is key to mastering the language. In Papua New Guinea, the linguistic diversity is a major challenge, but learning one of the local languages can be a rewarding experience.
That's a great summary, Mira, and I think our listeners would appreciate the tip about cultural immersion. After all, language is just one part of the cultural puzzle.
That's exactly. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have a podcast episode on cultural immersion. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Mira, we can call it Cultural Immersion 101 or something like that.
I like it. And I'm sure our listeners would love it too. Thanks for chatting with me.
No problem. Mira, it's always a pleasure to talk about language and culture.
Let's talk about safety and comfort for women travelers in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I know what you're thinking. Leo, these two countries might seem like an unlikely pair. But trust me, they have some interesting insights to offer.
I'm intrigued. Mira, as a traveler, I've always been curious about how different countries approach women's safety. Moldova, being a European country, might have some advantages. But Papua New Guinea, being a Pacific island nation, might have some unique challenges.
Exactly. In Moldova, women generally feel safe, especially in the capital city of Chisinau. There's a strong police presence, and the country has made efforts to combat domestic violence and human trafficking. As with any country, there are still areas where women might feel uncomfortable, like in crowded public transportation or at night in isolated areas.
That's interesting. In Papua New Guinea, the situation is quite different. The country has a high rate of violence against women, and there are many cultural and social barriers that prevent women from speaking out. However, there are also many initiatives underway to address these issues, such as women's empowerment programs and community-based projects to prevent violence.
Yes, it's a complex issue, but it's heartening to see that both countries are taking steps to address women's safety. In Moldova, for example, there are many organizations that provide support services for women who have experienced violence, including counseling, legal aid, and shelter.
That's great to hear. In Papua New Guinea, there are also many organizations working to promote women's rights and safety, including the Papua New Guinea Women's Association and the Family and Sexual Violence Action Committee. These organizations provide vital support services, including counseling, medical care, and advocacy.
It's also worth noting that both countries have laws in place to protect women from violence and harassment. In Moldova, for example, there's a law against domestic violence, and perpetrators can face up to 5 years in prison. In Papua New Guinea, there's a law against family and sexual violence, which provides for severe penalties for perpetrators.
That's good to know. But what about cultural attitudes towards women? Mira, in some countries, there are still deeply ingrained attitudes that view women as inferior or subordinate to men.
That's a great point. Leo, in Moldova, there's a strong cultural tradition of respecting women, and many men view women as equals. However, there are still some patriarchal attitudes that persist, especially in rural areas. In Papua New Guinea, the situation is more complex, with many traditional cultures that place a high value on masculinity and male dominance.
I see. So, it's a mixed bag, culturally speaking. But what about personal experiences? Mira, have you or any of our listeners had any experiences traveling in these countries as women?
Actually, I have a few friends who have traveled to Moldova, and they've all reported feeling very safe and welcome. One of them even said that she was surprised by how friendly and respectful the men were towards her. As for Papua New Guinea, I've heard that it's a bit more challenging for women travelers, especially in rural areas. But with some common sense and caution, many women have reported having positive experiences.
That's reassuring to hear, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that with some basic precautions and an understanding of the local culture, women can have safe and enjoyable experiences in both Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
Absolutely, Leo. And I think that's an important message to convey. Women shouldn't be discouraged from traveling to these countries, but rather should be aware of the local situation and take necessary precautions to stay safe.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Mia, thanks for sharing your insights on safety and comfort for women travelers in Moldova and Papua New Guinea.
Let's dive into the world of law and order, shall we? We're comparing the legal systems of Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I have to say, I'm excited to see how these two countries uphold individual rights and freedoms.
Sounds like a thrilling topic. Mia, I'm sure our listeners are on the edge of their seats. But seriously, it's fascinating to explore how different countries approach justice. In Moldova, for instance, the Constitution guarantees the right to a fair trial. But in practice, the judiciary has faced criticism for corruption and bias.
That's a great point. Yeah. Corruption is indeed a challenge in many countries. In Papua New Guinea, the legal system is based on a mix of common law and customary law. But what's interesting is that the country has a relative visual independence, with the Supreme Court having the final say on constitutional matters.
Well, that's a great contrast to Moldova, where the judiciary is often seen as being under the influence of the executive branch. But I'm curious. Mira, how do you think Papua New Guinea's unique blend of customary and common law affects the way individual rights are protected?
That's a fantastic question. Leo, in Papua New Guinea, customary law plays a significant role in disputes related to land and community. While this can be beneficial in preserving traditional practices, it can also lead to conflicts with human rights standards. For example, women's rights are not always fully protected under customary law.
That's a complex issue. In Moldova, women's rights are also a concern, particularly when it comes to domestic violence and trafficking. But at least the country has made efforts to strengthen its laws and institutions in this area. Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, still has a long way to go in addressing these issues.
Absolutely. But it's also worth noting that Papua New Guinea has made progress in promoting individual freedoms, such as freedom of speech and assembly. In fact, the country has a vibrant media landscape, with many independent newspapers and radio stations.
That's great to hear. Mira, and speaking of freedom of speech, I'm reminded of a landmark case in Moldova where a journalist was fined for criticizing the government. It's a stark reminder that even in countries with strong constitutions, individual rights can be vulnerable to attack.
Exactly. Theo. And that's why it's so important to have a robust system of checks and balances in place. In both Moldova and Papua New Guinea, there's still much work to be done in strengthening the rule of law and protecting individual rights. By exploring these issues, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities involved.
Well said. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential to have a nuanced understanding of these issues. If you think we've missed something important, please let us know in the comments.
Thanks for the shout out, Leo, and to our listeners. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you have any experiences or insights to share about the legal systems in Moldova or Papua New Guinea? When we think about relaxation and wellness, we often imagine serene landscapes and rejuvenating treatments. In Moldova, you can find some amazing spas that offer a range of services, from massages to facials, all set amidst beautiful vineyards or picturesque countryside.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I think it's interesting that Moldova is also known for its wine production. I mean, what's more relaxing than a glass of wine after a long day? But on the other hand, Papua New Guinea has a completely different approach to wellness. They have a rich traditional culture that emphasizes natural remedies and holistic practices.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Papua New Guinea so fascinating. They have this incredible knowledge of medicinal plants and natural healing methods that have been passed down through generations. It's like they have their own secret wellness recipe book.
Ah, that's a great way to put it. Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Papua New Guinea has some of the most stunning natural landscapes in the world. From the highlands to the coast, it's just breathtaking. And, of course, that natural beauty can be very therapeutic in itself.
Absolutely. Nature has a way of calming us down and putting things into perspective. And I think that's something that both Moldova and Papua New Guinea offer in abundance. But if I had to choose, I'd say that Moldova's spas are a bit more luxurious.
That's so... Mira, you're such a spa connoisseur. But, seriously, I think you're right. Moldova's spas do offer a more upscale experience, whereas Papua New Guinea's wellness culture is more about embracing the natural world and traditional practices.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes both countries so unique. They offer different approaches to wellness that are equally effective in their own way. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see a fusion of Moldovan wine therapy and Papua New Guinean natural remedies.
Last now, that's an interesting idea. Mira, and I think our listeners would love to hear more about that. But, for now, let's focus on the amazing wellness opportunities that both countries offer. If you're looking for a relaxing getaway, Moldova's spas are definitely worth considering.
And if you're looking for a more adventurous, off-the-beaten-path experience, Papua New Guinea is the way to go. You can immerse yourself in traditional culture, explore the stunning natural landscapes, and even try some of those natural remedies we were talking about.
Exactly. So, whether you're a spa lover or an adventure seeker, both Moldova and Papua New Guinea have something to offer. And, who knows, maybe one day we'll get to experience it all firsthand. Winks.
Last fingers crossed. Leo. But, for now, let's just enjoy the journey and explore all the amazing wellness opportunities that these two countries have to offer.
Sounds like a plan. Mira, and to our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been to Moldova or Papua New Guinea? What were your experiences like? Let us know in the comments.
When we think about opportunities for religious and spiritual needs, two countries come to mind: Moldova and Papua New Guinea. In Moldova, the dominant faith is Eastern Orthodox Christianity, with over 90% of the population adhering to it.
That's a strong majority. But what about other faiths? Mira, are they represented in Moldova?
Actually, yes. Moldova has a relatively tolerant attitude towards other religions. There are also Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish communities, among others. And, interestingly, Moldova has a unique blend of traditional and modern spiritual practices.
That sounds fascinating. I've heard that Papua New Guinea is one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world. How does that diversity play out in terms of spiritual and religious practices?
Great point. Papua New Guinea has over 800 languages and more than one Zaro ethnic groups, which means there's a vast array of spiritual traditions. Christianity is the main faith, but there are also many indigenous spiritual practices and a growing Muslim community.
Whoa, 800 languages. That's mind-boggling. I can imagine that would lead to a rich tapestry of spiritual practices. But how do the governments of these two countries support or restrict religious freedom?
Well, in Moldova, the government generally respects religious freedom, and there are no significant restrictions on practicing one's faith. However, there have been some tensions between the Orthodox Church and other faiths.
That's interesting. In Papua New Guinea, the government has a more complex relationship with religious freedom. While the Constitution guarantees freedom of worship, there have been instances of religious intolerance and even violence.
That's a concern. But it's also worth noting that Papua New Guinea has a strong tradition of community-based spiritual practices, which can be a powerful source of support and connection for people.
Community-based spirituality is so important. I've heard that in Moldova, there's a strong emphasis on family and community ties, which can also play a role in spiritual life.
Absolutely. In fact, many Moldovans see their spiritual practices as closely tied to their family and cultural heritage. And in Papua New Guinea, community is also at the heart of spiritual life, with many people participating in traditional ceremonies and rituals.
It's amazing how these two countries, despite their differences, both place such a strong emphasis on community and spirituality. I think our listeners would really appreciate learning more about these unique cultural traditions.
Definitely. And I think it's also worth highlighting the importance of respecting and appreciating these differences. By embracing our diversity, we can learn so much from each other and grow as individuals.
Well said, Mira. And to our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the intersection of spirituality and community? Share your stories and insights with us in the comments.
Social equality and respect for minorities, quite the delicate balance, don't you think? Leo? Let's dive into Moldova and Papua New Guinea. Two countries with unique approaches to fostering social harmony.
Indeed. Mira, I'm excited to explore how these countries address diversity. In Moldova, for instance, there's a strong emphasis on preserving traditional cultures, especially in rural areas. But what about minority groups, like the Roma people? How do you think they're represented?
That's a great point. Leo, Moldova has made efforts to integrate the Roma community, but there's still a long way to go. Education and economic opportunities are key to bridging the gap. On the other hand, Papua New Guinea is known for its incredible cultural diversity, with over 800 languages spoken. But with that diversity comes the challenge of representing all these groups fairly.
Wow, 800 languages. That's mind-boggling. I can imagine it's tough to create policies that cater to everyone. In Papua New Guinea, I've heard that traditional clan systems play a significant role in maintaining social order. How do you think this affects social equality, especially for women and marginalized groups?
Excellent question. Leo, while clan systems can provide a sense of community, they can also perpetuate patriarchal attitudes and limit opportunities for women. In Moldova, women's rights are more established, but there's still a way to go in terms of equal representation in politics and the workforce. I think both countries could learn from each other in this regard.
Absolutely. Mira, it's fascinating to see how different cultures approach social equality. In Papua New Guinea, I've noticed that community-based initiatives, like the House Create tradition, bring people together to discuss social issues. What about Moldova? Are there similar grassroots efforts that promote social harmony?
Actually, Leo, Moldova has a strong tradition of folk culture, with many festivals and celebrations that bring people together. For example, the Moldova Ethno Festival showcases traditional music, dance, and crafts. These events help foster a sense of national identity and promote social cohesion.
That sounds wonderful. Mira, I can imagine the energy and excitement of those festivals. But what about more formal institutions, like schools and government agencies? How do they promote social equality and respect for minorities in both countries?
Well, Leo, in Moldova, education is compulsory, and schools strive to promote inclusivity and cultural diversity. However, there is still a need for more resources and support for marginalized groups. In Papua New Guinea, the government has implemented policies like the National Strategy for Social Protection to address poverty and inequality. But implementation can be challenging, especially in rural areas.
I see. It's clear that both countries face unique challenges in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. But what about the role of international organizations and NGOs? How do they support these efforts in Moldova and Papua New Guinea?
Great question. Leo, international organizations like the UN and the EU provide crucial support for social development projects in both countries. NGOs, like the Moldova for All initiative, work to promote inclusive education and social inclusion. In Papua New Guinea, organizations like the PNG Women's Association advocate for women's rights and empowerment.
That's heartening to hear. Mira, it's clear that there are many efforts underway to promote social equality and respect for minorities in both countries. As we wrap up this topic, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What do you think are the most pressing issues related to social equality in Moldova and Papua New Guinea? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Absolutely. Leo, we'd love to hear from you. And as we move on to our next topic, I'm excited to explore more of the unique cultural traditions and social dynamics in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. So, let's dive into the world of taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I know, it sounds like a thrilling topic, but trust me, it's essential for those considering a move.
Indeed. Mira, who doesn't love talking about taxes and pension plans? But seriously, it's crucial to understand how these countries support their immigrant residents. Let's start with Moldova. As a member of the European Free Trade Association, Moldova has a relatively straightforward tax system.
That's right. Leo, Moldova has a flat income tax rate of 12%, which is relatively low compared to other European countries. They also have a social security contribution of 22%, which is deducted from the employee's salary. Ouch, that's a bit steep, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is. But, on the bright side, Moldova has a relatively simple tax filing process, and foreigners can claim a tax refund if they've paid too much tax. Now, let's jump to Papua New Guinea. Their tax system is a bit more complicated, with a progressive tax rate ranging from 0% to 40%.
No, that's a big range. And, if I'm not mistaken, Papua New Guinea also has a goods and services tax of 10%, which can add up quickly. But, on the other hand, they have a relatively low social security contribution of 8.5%. It's like they're trying to balance things out.
Exactly. Mira, and in terms of retirement, Moldova has a state pension system, which is funded by the social security contributions. However, the pension age is 60 for men and 57 for women, which is relatively low compared to other European countries.
That's interesting. Leo, Papua New Guinea, on the other hand, has a more complex pension system, with both public and private pension schemes available. The pension age is 60 for both men and women, which is relatively high compared to some other countries.
Yeah, it is. But, in terms of social rights, both countries have some interesting approaches. Moldova has a relatively comprehensive social security system, which includes healthcare, unemployment benefits, and family allowances.
That's great. Leo, and Papua New Guinea has a more community-based approach to social welfare, with a focus on traditional and cultural practices. For example, they have a system of one toke or one talk, which emphasizes community support and mutual aid.
Ah, that's fascinating. Mira, it's like they're trying to balance modernization with traditional values. And, speaking of balance, I think it's interesting to note that both countries have their own unique approaches to supporting immigrant residents.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this topic so interesting. It's not just about numbers and policies. It's about people and their lives. So, if you're considering a move to either Moldova or Papua New Guinea, I hope this conversation has given you a better understanding of what to expect.
Indeed. Mira, and if you're a listener living in either of these countries, we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Please share your stories with us in the comments.
Alright, let's dive into our final topic for today. The rate of meeting specific interests in Moldova and Papua New Guinea. I'm excited to explore these two countries and see how they cater to different passions and hobbies.
Chuckles, yeah. I'm curious to see how Moldova's love for wine and traditional folk music compares to Papua New Guinea's vibrant tribal culture and love for rugby. It's going to be an interesting comparison. That's for sure.
Now, swell. Let's start with Moldova. I've heard that they have a thriving wine industry, with many vineyards and wine festivals throughout the year. If you're a wine enthusiast, Moldova is definitely the place to be.
That's right. Mira. And not only is the wine amazing, but the scenery is also stunning. The rolling hills and picturesque villages make it the perfect destination for nature lovers and photographers.
Smiling, I can just imagine it now, sipping a glass of wine while taking in the breathtaking views of the Moldovan countryside. But what about Papua New Guinea? How does it compare in terms of meeting specific interests?
Well, Papua New Guinea is a paradise for adventure seekers and culture enthusiasts. The country is home to many traditional tribes, each with their own unique customs and traditions. And if you're into sports, Papua New Guinea is passionate about rugby. They even have a national team that competes in international tournaments.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience the vibrant culture and exciting sports scene in Papua New Guinea. But what about niche hobby clubs or specialized events? How do these two countries cater to enthusiasts with specific interests?
Great question, Mira. In Moldova, there are many clubs and organizations dedicated to traditional folk music and dance. You can even attend a traditional folk festival and learn how to dance the hora or play the accordion.
Nice. That sounds like so much fun. I'd love to learn how to dance the hora. And what about Papua New Guinea? Are there any unique events or clubs that cater to specific interests?
Actually, yes. Papua New Guinea has a growing surfing community, and there are several surf schools and clubs along the coast. You can even attend a surf competition or festival and meet other surf enthusiasts from around the world.
That's really cool. I'm sure our listeners who are into surfing would love to know about that. And what about community engagement? How do these two countries foster diverse interests and bring people together?
Well, in Moldova, there are many community centers and cultural organizations that offer classes and workshops on traditional crafts, music, and dance. You can even attend a community festival and meet locals who share your interests.
That sounds wonderful. And in Papua New Guinea, community engagement is all about tribal culture and tradition. You can attend a traditional sing-sing ceremony or visit a local village and learn about their customs and way of life.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Papua New Guinea so unique, the opportunity to experience a truly different culture and way of life.
Absolutely. I think that's all the time we have for today. I hope our listeners have enjoyed this comparison of Moldova and Papua New Guinea. And we'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to follow the Jet Off AI YouTube channel for more episodes like this. And hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop.
And don't forget to share your thoughts, comments, and critiques below. We love reading and responding to them. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be back soon with more comparisons and adventures. Take care, and see you in the next one.